All right, let's talk about documentation. That dirty, dirty word. Nobody wants to read documentation. Let's be honest, it's not exactly the most enjoyable pastime. But hey, if you want to do some Python scripting inside of Maya, reading the documentation is almost always necessary, because otherwise, how would you know what you're gonna, what you're gonna do? How would you know how to find out all the different commands? How would you know all the different flags and what they mean? And the only answer to that is the documentation. So let me just type this my.cmds as cmds. This little line here that we've been using this whole time. What the hell does this line mean? To simplify things, I'm just going to remove that as cmds. So I want to explain what this import command does. So import basically imports different types of modules, different modules that you have inside of Python that Python has access to. Now Python has a lot of built-in modules such as random. So if I import random, now I have access to all the random functions. So I can inspect what's inside of random using this dir function. This dir function is built into Python. So if I run dir on this, you can see I have a bunch of these, in this result, I have a bunch of these commands that I actually have access to inside of this random module. So now if I do dir, if I import maya.cmds, and then I do dir maya.cmds, and this way, let's just run that again so we can see. So this way you can kind of see all the different commands available to you inside of Maya. And there's a lot, there's a hell of a lot of commands. I mean, this is Maya we're talking about. So, basically everything that you could hope to do inside of, the viewport or in these menus, there is a convenient command for it inside of maya.cmds. But how do we know what, some of these things like xgm, promote, render, like what the hell does that mean? What the hell does this mean? How do you find these things out? Well, that's where the help documentation comes into play. So if you come to help and then you come down to Maya scripting reference, you have a bunch of options here, one for Mel, but we're concerned about Python because we're using Python here. So I'm going to click on this Python command reference, and that will bring us to this web page. It creates a new tab in your web browser. And then it brings us to this Maya help page where you can see, thousands of commands, hundreds, if not thousands, of all these commands. And, if you click into any one of these, you can kind of get more information on it. So for this example, I'm going to show you guys the bevel command, polybevel. So if I come in here and I click polybevel, you can see we kind of come to this page now that documents what this polybevel command does. And it's kind of intimidating at first because you're looking at this and you're like, what the hell does all this stuff mean? Like it's super confusing, especially if you don't know what you're looking for. But once you kind of understand, what you're kind of looking at, it makes a lot more sense and it actually becomes crucial to scripting inside of Maya. So like under this synopsis part, you can pretty much ignore this top section here. It's just like a navigational thing, right? So under this synopsis part is kind of where you can get an overview of what this command can do. All the different flags. So these are different flags here that are available to polybevel. So, you can set the amount of segments and you can, set the offset, things like that, like whether it's world space or not, set it, given a name and all kinds of cool stuff. And, how do you know what all these different flags do? Well, if you click into one of these flags, so for example, I'm going to click into segments, it'll bring me down to this portion of the page where you can actually see the segment, what the segments flag means. So it says the number of segments used for beveling. So I think that's kind of straightforward. So I think it's just the number of edges, edge loops or whatever that it adds when you bevel. But something that I don't think a lot of people actually look at enough is the Python examples. So, I mean, this is kind of a summary of what you can do with the commands, you know. So in this case, it's kind of summarizing all the small little things that you can do inside of this bevel command. So I can actually copy all this code. So I can copy this, come straight into Maya and paste this guy in. And you can actually run these commands to see what they do. So if I run this first block, you can see nothing's happened, but it's done something and then it's deleted the object. So it's created a cube, it's done a bevel, and then it's deleted the cube. So obviously we see nothing because, you know, this last line's deleting the cube. Well, let's run this command again. Okay, now this time I didn't select delete, so it didn't delete the cube, and I can kind of see what it's doing. It's actually beveling, you know, this. If I do highlight selection, you see it's beveling this edge there. Whereas if I just run just the polycube command, you can see it creates just a default cube, nothing special there. And, you know, it's kind of giving it an offset of 0.2. So let's look at this bevel inside of this channel box. Let's look at this bevel, this offset there. So if I kind of adjust this offset, you can kind of see that it adjusts the amount of beveling that it's doing on this edge. So that's kind of cool. You can set the offset with this offset flag. That's pretty handy. So let's delete that. Let's come down to this next section. Let's see what this does. It says replace an edge by 4 faces. The new faces are rounding a smooth angle. Okay, and that's kind of interesting. Let's run it and see what happens. So run this code and okay, I see what's happening. It's created this cube, it's beveled it, but it's also kind of beveled it with, you know, like 4 segments. I can see here it says 4 segments. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then it's set it with an offset of 0.4. So if I wanted to modify this code, if I wanted to set the offset to 0.2 again, and maybe this time have 6 segments, you just change that line there and then run this code again and see what happens. And now you see we get 6 segments and, you know, the offset is slightly less, so it's a little bit more acute of a bevel. And, you know, you can play around with these different flags in order to get the, you know, get the result the way you want. Now, looking at this, I can also see that it's, you know, the poly bevel command is accepting a string at the beginning. So what is it actually doing? So it looks like we're creating a cube. Okay, so we're creating this cube, and an N is short for name. So what we're doing is we're creating a cube with the name PLG. So you can see in this outliner they've got this PLG named cube. And then what we're doing with the poly bevels, we're passing PLG, the object PLG, but .e. Now what does the .e mean? Now that's a little bit interesting. So I think this here is actually referring to the edge. So we're looking at all the edges inside of PLG. And then we're saying we want the edge that's index number 7. So if you look at this cube, we have a bunch of edges here. So index number 7 must be one's like specific edge on this cube. And then we're just beveling that particular edge. So if I run this, you can see it's beveling that edge. Now, if I undo and I just go into component mode and I select this edge, you can see inside of the script editor what it's actually doing. It's saying we're selecting PLG E7. So that's how we know that this is actually index number 7 of the edge. So if I select another edge, you can see this is index 5, this is index 1. So each edge has a unique index within this object, and that's how you can target which edge you want to bevel. And that's pretty interesting, and we can kind of use that to our advantage. So here maybe I want to just kind of, you know, use the documentation in conjunction with playing around inside of Maya in order to get some sort of bevel command that I like. Right, so here what we can do is we need to find the edge that we have selected, and we can use our trusty ls command, lssl, to list our selection. So if I have this selected and I run this command, let's see what we get. So we're getting a list back, and inside of that list is the edge index that we have selected. So it's getting the object, but it's also getting the edge and the index of that edge. So if I have multiple edges selected and I run this, you can see it's going to populate that return list with a bunch of different edges. So here I've got 3 edges because I've got 3 edges selected here, and it's gotten the index of each one of those. So we can use this somehow. Let's store this guy. Okay, let's call this selected edges. And then what we can do is we can use the CMDS bevel, polybevel. Use this polybevel command and give it our selected edges. And then without any flags, let's just run it and see what happens. Okay, so let's run all this code. Now you can see it's beveled all 3 of these edges. So if I select another edge and I run this again, it's going to bevel that edge. So that's pretty handy. And we can kind of use this now to, you know, write like a little button, for example, put it on the shelf. So now we have a little button that whatever edge we have selected, we can bevel it like that. I mean, that doesn't really give us any advantages to just like using the standard Maya, you know, bevel edge command there. And we even have like a nice UI thing that we can adjust. So what's the advantage of doing it this way? Well, we can set some presets into this. You know, polybevel, you know, can do more things like add additional edges and also round them. So what we can actually do is let's delete this object and let's create a fresh cube. Okay, so we have a fresh cube now. And let's come back to the documentation and look at some of these flags and kind of break down this documentation so we can, you know, figure it out a little bit more. So here we've got this summary of all the different flags. Now we can take a look through each one of these flags to kind of see if it has what we want. So I kind of want to add more segments. So we already know we can use this segments flag. So if I click on that, it brings us down here. It says the default is 1. And what does it take? So this is an important column here. So this is the command and then kind of like a summary of the command, but then this is what the command accepts, or what this flag, I should say, what this particular flag accepts. So this flag accepts an integer. So we can come back here. I can even copy this and then come back here. Edges, paste this here and then do equals. And let's give it an integer, and it says by default it's 1. Maybe I want 5 segments. So now let's grab this edge, run this command, and now you can see it's beveled it with 5 different segments. So that's pretty handy, right? That's kind of like what we were doing before. But now maybe I want to adjust the amount of rounding. So maybe I want something that bevels with 5 segments, but I don't want it rounded. I kind of want it flat. So how would we do this inside of the actual, in the scene? So if you come over here and you look at this polybevel in the channel box, this polybevel node, what we can actually do is kind of adjust the roundness here, right? And you can see right now it's not doing anything. And that's because we have Autofit on. So let's turn Autofit off. Now we can kind of adjust the roundness. So maybe I want it completely flat. So that would be a roundness value of 0, right? So something like that. So maybe by default, I want my bevel to bevel it, but I want it to be flat and also have 5 of these segments. So this is sort of what I'd be doing. Now to recreate that, let's come back over to our documentation and let's see if there's an Autofit option in this documentation here. Now let's have a quick scan and I can see here, right here, right? Autofit, boom. Now we come down to Autofit and let's have a read. It says if Autofit is on, it computes a smooth roundness, new facets round off a smooth angle, and we don't want this. So this is defaulting to be true. So it's default on, and you can see it takes a Boolean. So a Boolean, if you remember, is true or false, and it's defaulting to true. We don't want Autofit, so we can adjust the roundness. So let's come back up and have a quick look at the roundness option now. So let's see, is there a roundness option here? It's like, where's Waldo or where's Wally? In Australia, we call where's Wally. Instead of Waldo, we call it where's Wally. But let's hit roundness, okay? We'll come down to the roundness. And it says the roundness of bevel is taken into account when Autofit is off. Okay, so that kind of gives us a little bit of an indication that, okay, Autofit needs to be off for this roundness value, value to actually take effect. So we already kind of know that, so that's good. Let's come back to Maya, and then let's have a quick play around with this. So let's set Autofit to false, okay? Like we were alluding to before, we need that to be false so we can adjust the roundness. So now let's do roundness is equal to 0. So that sets our roundness equal to 0, so we get a nice flat edge like that. So let me try to select this edge now and run this command. Let's see what happens. And it does exactly that. And you see it's done exactly what we wanted to. It's beveled it, it's set 5 segments, and it's set it so that the roundness is flat. And we had to also set Autofit to false, so it's off, in order for it to be nice and flat like that. Now we can make this a shelf command. Now this is a little bit more helpful than the default bevel, because now if you want to do a specific type of bevel, like this, where you bevel it and it's flat, but it's got more segments, you've got a nice little button that you can hit that does exactly that. And all this is only possible because we've had, like a quick look at this documentation to kind of read through all these different flags and to kind of break down what this documentation is actually saying, so we can find what we need to in order to make these adjustments. So just a quick overview of this documentation page again. So this is a summary, all the different flags available, and you can click on any one of these and it brings you down to this section here. And these are all the different flags. You can even see here it says flags. So these are all the different flags available, and it's kind of now a summary of all these different flags and why you would want to use them and what they do, what they mean, and what these flags accept most importantly. So now I know roundness takes a float value, which is a floating point number, whereas segments takes an integer, which is a whole number. And other things like smoothing angle and whatnot. I think the smoothing angle is in order for you to make like a hard or soft edge. So we can maybe do a bevel where it's flat, but it's also a soft edge by using this smoothing angle option. So I can copy this, paste it in here now, and maybe I want a smoothing angle of 90, for example. So now if I run this command, you can see it's kind of done this smoothing angle thing on this, so it's not flat and faceted like that. And it's you could already see the wealth of possibilities just by having access to all these commands. So if I come back to all commands at the top, it brings me back to this page where I can kind of look through all these commands and find out what they do. And the chances are whatever you want to do, there's a command for it already. It's in here. Or you'll have the building blocks. You'll have all the the smaller commands in here that you can string together in order to do what you want. Yeah, so not really a scripting lesson, this one, but very, very related and very important. Just kind of breaking down the documentation and showing you guys how to look at it. And yeah, like in the future, hopefully I'll have some more videos which kind of talk through all the different little tricks to find out which command you need to use. There's like some tricks you can do inside of the script editor, like performing the command in here to see exactly what command shows up. And then, doing other things like playing around with these values here, which sometimes correlate to the actual command flags themselves, as we've seen. Yeah. So make sure you stick around.